Yeah, I learned my right from wrong on a song. I let my heart bleed on my sleeve through microphones. I'm trying to right my wrongs. Promise I do. I ain't trying to stay up on that wide road, cause I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no. Oh, I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no.
Welcome back to The Urban Perspective, where we bring you stories that matter from the voices of those who have lived them. Today we have a guest who's not just sitting on the bench. She's out here in the community making moves to change how justice is delivered. Judge Stephanie Sawyer is a progressive voice in the courtroom and beyond, known for her work in finding alternatives to incarceration and advocating for real sentencing reform. Judge Sawyer didn't just stop at wearing the robe. She's founded the Sentencing Foundation, an organization aimed at reducing mass incarceration by providing second chances and rethinking how we approach justice. She's one of the few judges out here that actively working to bring people back into society, not just send them away. Judge Sawyer, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Honored to be here.
Judge Sawyer, I got to ask questions. Was becoming a judge always part of your plan, or did it happen as a result of seeing the limits of what you could do as an attorney?
Well, it was clearly the latter. Be honest with you, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 9 years old, so to fight for injustice. I did not have even a minor taste for becoming a judge. In fact, I reluctantly ran, and then when I came close, I figured I had to follow through. But I didn't think about becoming a judge probably until the year or so before the first time I ran.
You know, I know a lot of people think that judges have all the power, but I'm curious, does stepping into this role give you the platform you were looking for to make a real difference in the lives of the people you see every day in your courtrooms?
Well, it actually did. But again, it wasn't a comprehensive plan for me, right? What it was, at some point I realized that I could do a better job than most judges I stood in front of. Okay. And I had an obligation to try to do that. And then when I actually became a judge as a woman of color, the issue of mass incarceration insults me on a very personal level. Uh-huh. And so it really was born out of me trying to figure out, how do I do my job as a judge and still sleep at night? So all of what I do now evolved out of me. One, my mother told me that people are only as good as their word, right? At the end of the day, we're all born to die, right? And when they throw dirt over you, or however you would wish to end your life, whether it's cremation or whatever. But at the end of the day, your person's only as good as their word. And when I ran in Philadelphia, promising to be fairness upon which every Philadelphian could rely. And when I was actually sworn in, I had to figure out, how do I deliver on that promise? How do I do this job in a way that I still can look in the mirror and have respect for myself? Because at the end of the day, respecting myself is far more important than what anybody else thinks about me.
Let me just ask a sort of a personal question. How often did you actually see the taint of racism, either through through the eyes of prosecution, or even through the eyes of defense attorneys in your courtroom?
Okay, well, that's a pretty loaded question.
Okay.
Right? Particularly as a sitting judge, you're asking me specifically about whether or not I've run across racist judges, lawyers, defense, or ADAs, whatever. They're all human beings, right? And human beings are complicated people, right? They're complicated entities, but this is a racist society.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, socialism doesn't work on Black people or white people or Hispanic people. Socialism works on people. So that would explain sometimes how maybe that Black cop is worse than that white cop, right? And so racism is mixed in to everything that we do, particularly in this country. And so to parcel out ADAs or defense attorneys or judges, to parcel them out and ask me if I see racism in those areas, when racism exists in society in everybody. So the answer is obviously yes, but no more or less than any other segment.
It's baked into it's systemic.
It's systemic, 100%.
It's baked into the system.
if you know, you're dealing with accountants, right? Some are racist, some are not.
They even found it in the algorithms of AI.
Absolutely, because ultimately the rhythms were written by people.
It reflects a person. All right. You're in a unique position. You're both part of the community with someone who has to make decisions that affect minority lives in major ways. I imagine that can weigh heavily on you. What's it like to be the person who decides someone's future, especially when you see the same people in your courtrooms that you're working to uplift?
I don't see it as any different than, I'm a big sports fan. I love basketball and football and tennis and track and field. And I don't see my job as judge any different than the job of an umpire, right? In the United States, the criminal justice system, and in fact, the jurisprudence system is an adversarial system whereby adverse parties speak their a vision of what they think is fair based upon a certain circumstance. And they are singing or playing to either an audience of a judge or the audience of a jury, right? And the judge or the jury acts as the fact finder. And so I just hear both sides and I call them as I see them.
Balls and strikes.
That's it. I call them as I see them. Even when I'm sentencing folks, I say to them, I say, sir, ma'am, I'm going to be instructed by your conduct. If I give you an opportunity and you never take hold of it, then at some point I have to realize you don't want to, you know? And so obviously I try to find out what that reason is. If it's, you know, trauma or capabilities or those kinds of things, then we have an obligation to bridge that gap. But if it's an issue of desire and if an issue of intentions, right? Some people are so broken that they're only going to reap havoc on the rest of us. And I have an obligation when I see that to protect society. But that's a very small percentage of the people that I see in the criminal justice system. The larger percentage are people that are desperate, making really bad decisions. And my job as a judge, as I see it, is to help remove that desperation to find out, you know, who's going to offend out of nefarious reasons and who's not.
Your sentencing foundation is doing important work providing alternatives to incarceration, ensuring there's a better way than just locking people up. Can you tell us more about the foundation?
Sure. I think it's best to fully understand the sentencing foundation is to understand how it evolved, because the sentencing foundation is actually the logistical support for a restorative justice program I created. So as I said, when I hit the bench in 2014, it was my endeavor as a woman of color to figure out how I was going to navigate this space and still sleep at night. And so just by happenstance, I had a case that just screamed out a really unconventional kind of disposition where the person I thought was really desperate and could use the help of a resource that I was personally aware of. So I picked the phone up and I called and I set it up. And lo and behold, that person had a very different outcome than folks that I didn't do that for. And so from 2014 to 2018, I created a program, which I didn't even have a name for to the end of 2017, early 2018. But the name of the program is Resource-Based Sentencing and Supervision. So that's the program that I created. And it took me 4 years to kind of put it together and see how here. And this is the binder for Resource-Based Sentencing and Supervision. And so the binder is actually all the procedures and the protocols, and it's intended for the use by the judge to know how to run the program of resource-based sentencing and supervision. And so as I ran the program from 2018 to 2020, you know, the transformations that I saw in my courtroom were just undeniable, right? I had parents in the back of the courtroom with tears in their eyes thanking me for the changes in their loved ones. You know, I've had defendants tell me, Judge, this is the longest I've been out of jail. Judge, this is the first time me and my kids are good. Judge, this is the longest I've been sober. Judge, this is the longest I had a job. These stabilizing factors that are indicative of those that may recidivize, we kept getting these kinds of responses. And while that's great for the people in my courtroom, I had a really deflated feeling around 2020, you know, when the pandemic hit and we all had a little bit too much time to spend in the house. And I thought to myself, you know, how am I going to get rid of this deflated feeling that my program is working? And you might say, well, why were you deflated when you saw your program working? Well, it's simple, right? Because I had to appreciate my place in the sun. I'm one of 20 or 30 judges in the criminal courtroom in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is one of 197 judicial districts. First judicial district is Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia is one of 197 judicial districts in the state of Pennsylvania, and that doesn't include the federal system. So there's, one of the states doesn't include the federal system. So I could run this program till I'm blue in the face, and it would never have an effect on shrinking and moving that needle on mass incarceration, nor would it have an effect on shrinking that huge trust gap between ordinary citizens and the criminal justice system. And so it was at that point I realized, I needed an entity that could act as the logistical support for the program, because I couldn't give this binder to a judge who wants to run the program in Texas or Georgia or anywhere else other than Philadelphia, because the resources in this binder are only in the service area of the jurisdiction for which I sit. And so there had to be the logistical support to be able to make this program equally duplicatable in any courtroom, state or federal. And that is the job of the Sentencing Foundation, to be the logistical support to do that. And so we went from having a handful of judges in Philadelphia to there being 30 registered judges in almost 20 jurisdictions. Okay. There's still a few judges that are waiting for us to finish providing their binders, but that is the job of the Sentencing Foundation. It is about the support for allowing this program to actually over time get into every criminal courtroom so that we can be fairness upon which every person, not just every Philadelphian, can depend upon.
Without violating some perhaps ethical standards, can you tell me of a case where what you did or the alternative to sentencing, how it impacted some individual's life or the lives of their families?
Well, I mean, it's every day. Listen, the underlying statisticians, criminologists will tell you, right, that those folks that offend out of nefarious reasons, that they just like to hurt people. They're masochistic people, or they just like to hurt people, and those horrific stories that hit the headlines. The statisticians will tell you this is somewhere between 8 to 15% of the cases. Some people might even say 15 to 20%. I personally, after being on the bench for 10 years, don't believe it's 20%. I think it's closer to 10 to 12%, maybe even a little bit less than that. But what I can say is this, that even if there is a belief that there's 20%, then it's 80% that do not commit crimes out of a nefarious place. And if you wish to truly be a tool that reduces crime for society at large, you have to address recidivism by addressing the desperation and the root cause reason for the actual offense. And so in terms of stories, they're so numerous, I can't even pinpoint one. Okay. Like it's what we do in our courtroom every day. Okay. More specifically on Mondays and Fridays. And so I might have a case, just as an example. There might be many of cases where you find the offense gravity score, the prior record score, and the sentencing guidelines will give me a guidelines of 60 to 72 months of incarceration, right? But this is a person, because they've had multiple plids, but they still haven't hurt anybody. They're not violent people. They only have a 10th grade education. You can see what the issue is. And so we routinely require them to get their high school diploma, require them to address their trauma their issues, to require them to make sure they have stable income, require them to have stable housing. These are the real indicating factors that determine whether or not somebody is going to actually commit more crimes. And so I guess a better person to ask that would be some of the lawyers that see the difference between what happens to their clients in my courtroom and what happens to their clients in other courtrooms. Okay.
I think you buttoned that up. You're working on making an even bigger impact on sentencing reform and justice in our communities. Are there specific programs or goals that you're working on in that regard?
I liken myself to be a dot connector, right? Because the things that are needed already exist. They just need to be working cohesively together. So one of the things that the Sentencing Foundation, we did here in Philadelphia, that is the next step to every other jurisdiction that runs the program, is having resource networking events, right? The whole purpose of resource networking events is for nonprofit organizations to be layered together and work together. So initially, when I started working on the resource networks that we use here in Philadelphia, we had a number of for-profit organizations that we couldn't use, right? I can't order somebody to go to a for-profit organization and pay a fee for vocational training when I know they don't have stable housing and can't feed their families and can't feed themselves. So you can't, that's not viable, right? And so we connected with these for-profit organizations, but we kind of put them on the side. And as we began to have our resource networking events, what we did was we connected them with nonprofit organizations, for example, like the Urban League. The Urban League has a program called Out for Good, right? And so we connected Out for Good with a for-profit organization like Global Trucking for CDLs. So we're ordering them to go, if they want a CDL, we'll order them to go and get enrolled in the Urban League's Out for Good program. And then Urban League will pay the fee for Global Trucking so that now they can get that CDL. Or PA Barber School, because what do a lot of people do when they're in custody? They learn to cut hair. When they come out, are any of them certified so that they can open their own barbershop? Of course not. And so PA Barber School will allow them to get certified. But again, that was a for-profit organization. And so by layering them with an Urban League, we are able to have them enroll at the Urban League and then go to PA Barber School where Urban League pays the fees. The whole original process of thought on that was, there is no longer an argument that mass incarceration is sustainable. Nobody will tell you that, right? Rather it's from, the conservative side of the plate that will say it's fiscally unfeasible to do that, or rather it's from the liberal side of the fence that says the emotional toll that it takes on the family is kind of morally shameful, right? Regardless of which way you come from it, there's no other third argument that says that mass incarceration is sustainable. And so when that happens, there's money available for these nonprofit organizations. And where there's money, there's charlatans. And the statisticians will also tell you that there's been a huge proliferation of nonprofit organizations, but which ones are actually delivering this service? So when a nonprofit organization works with the Sentencing Foundation to be in the resource network of the jurisdiction using it, then they have to attest to the fact that they're going to be held accountable to deliver the service they say they're going to deliver. And so when you have a network of efficacious reentry resources that inter-refer to each other, it kind of blocks out the charlatans because they're not able to get the kind of client base that they need to be able to justify continuing to get that nonprofit dollar.
That makes sense. And some people have referred to nonprofits as the new drug game. People are, they're hustling,
Well, it is a hustle. But you know what, though? Life's a hustle, right?
Yeah.
I remember when I was a lawyer for 20 years and I worked for myself before I became a judge. That was a hustle. I had to go from, Philadelphia County to Chester County to Montgomery County to I had to run after, have a strategy on how to get clients and how to make them pay. And, so
it's all a hustle.
Life's a hustle.
If you're a doctor, then drugs or medicine is your hustle. If you're a lawyer, your time and trade in the law is your hustle. And whatever it is, whatever you're doing is your hustle. That's your gig.
Sure, you're right. Sure, you're right.
I'm always interested when it comes to nonprofits, to those that actually are in the weeds, that those that are really in the community is really doing the work, They say that those that are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So I'm interested in the ones that are in the weeds because a lot of people are well-intentioned and well-meaning in this work. But my position is if this isn't something that you would virtually do for free, then you really shouldn't be doing it at all,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Because again, if you're in it if you're in a nonprofit stance for a profit, that sounds like a bad fit from the door.
Yeah. Almost an oxymoron, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, sure, you should be able to live. So if you're working with a nonprofit, you should certainly be able to pull a salary. But your highest priority on your why should not be a paycheck. Because if it is, like you said, you're in the wrong area.
Yeah, you're in the wrong area. We've got folks listening who want to be a part of the solution but don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
How can they support your work?
Well, that's really easy, right? Number one, those of you that are in the criminal justice realm, whether you're in law school or whether you're in college or whatever, we always welcome interns, and you can go right to the sentencingfoundation.org and you can get involved that way. If you're a judge and you're listening, by all means, right? The program itself of resource-based sentencing and supervision, the program was written and created distinctly inside the parameters of the discretion that every judge gets once they're sworn in, right? Because this was like, as I said, I didn't Mother May I this program. I didn't, go to an administrator and say, hey, I think can I Mother May I? No, I didn't do any of that, right? Because I wanted to be responsible for that which I did, right? So I'm not going to just follow a certain formula for how a courtroom is supposed to be run if I couldn't personally, on a moral level, stand behind it. And so I couldn't create the mechanism by which I would do my job through asking somebody else. Instead, I took a look at what the rules had to say and took a look at what the judge's discretion had to be. And so we distinctly created it in a way that if you are a judge or know a judge that is restorative justice minded, the program itself was created to fit right within the discretion you already have. We only need to find judges that have what they say in the balls to carry it out.
Well, along those lines, us at APFFC, my foundation, that we've been reaching out to judges on your behalf, on behalf of your organization.
Yes, indeed. I'm looking forward to having the chance to talk with them as well.
Yeah. So that seems to be moving along, but I'll keep you posted as to exactly where we're at.
Right. And so if you are a nonprofit organization, you can be very assistive and get involved. Again, if you're a judge, if you want to be a volunteer, or if you're a nonprofit organization, step one, go to the sentencingfoundation.org and then go onto the page as to whether or not you want to get involved as a volunteer, whether you want to get involved as a nonprofit organization, or whether you want to get involved as a judge. As a nonprofit organization, right? If you are working in a jurisdiction that you work with a judge, great. You can refer that judge to us. If you're not, but we have a judge in that area already, you can connect with the network of the judge that we already have working. So we can match reentry resource to judges based upon what your service area can be. So that's how you can get involved if you're a nonprofit
online address is
the sentencingfoundation.org.
The way that we work, we seem to have covered pretty much everything. Sawyer never leaves a lot to be desired.
Well, I say this honestly, and this is something that I believe is kind of culminating from the history of fixing the problem of mass incarceration, right? Maybe I'll just give a little background as to how I came to understand that resource-based sentencing and supervision is kind of the antidote to mass incarceration, right? And that is, at first, I said to myself, before I even had a name for it and created the program, it was about identifying what the problem was before you can actually fashion a solution, right? And so we all know the proliferation of mass incarceration happened in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. It went from here to kaboom, all the way up here. And so the question that I asked myself in 2014 is, what were we as a system doing that was maintaining these elevated numbers some 20, 30, 40 years later? And when I looked at it, it was actually very glaringly obvious, right? The judges have been set up to be the executioner, right? Because the way the system operates, by operation, judges have abdicated their authority over individuals in the supervision stage to probation and parole.
Was some of this as a result of the new sentencing guidelines where it limited the judge's discretion?
And well, that was actually the continuation of it, right? How it really happened is with the proliferation of mass incarceration, the numbers of how will you handle that, the mass numbers was the question. And the answers that came from it was that judges, again, were not there for part of the solution, right? So if you are found guilty by a judge or a jury, if you plead guilty to a case, you have to be sentenced by a judge, right? And typically speaking, except for diversion programs and specialty courts, which I'll allude to in a moment, because while it's a step in the right direction, I find it to be wholly still insufficient, right? But when you face that sentencing judge, that judge will sentence you to probation, and then off to a probation or parole, a probation officer you go. Or they'll sentence him to incarceration, then off to the Department of Correction you go, depending on which numbers you look at, somewhere between 95 and 97% get out. And then off to a parole officer they go. And the very next time the judge who actually sentenced you sees you is when a probation or parole officer is so frustrated they opine revocation, right? And if they opine revocation, mind you, that will just be either they're frustrated that you're not doing what they say, reporting when you're supposed to report, hot urines, whatever, problems they're alleging that you're doing that's not in conformity with the rules of probation. Or more typically, you caught a new case or you caught a new conviction, right? If you caught a new case, then the question is, do I lift the detainer and let you fight the case from the street as opposed to fighting it from jail? Or you caught a new conviction and that's a direct violation. So the next time you see the judge that sentenced you, it's time to get punished again, right? Because the judge, if it's just a technical violation where the probation officer is alleging that there should be a revocation, if the last time the judge saw you was when they sentenced you, that could have been months ago, that could have been years ago. That judge doesn't know who you are. That judge is not familiar with you. And that judge looks at the probation report and goes, oh, this probation or parole officer sees them every week or every other week, and they must know them way better than I do. And they just rubber stamp the recommendations by probation. When you do that, number one, the system looks really collusive. And the trust gap between ordinary citizens and the criminal justice system gets larger and larger and larger. When you do that, the only purpose for judges is for punishment purpose. If I'm only here to punish folks, if the only reason a person sees a judge is when they're about to get slammed, then they never want to see a judge. So as soon as they walk in the courtroom, they're not paying you any attention. There's no trust gap. There's no trust between somebody that walked in the courtroom knowing that the only reason that they're there is to be punished. They're not there for help, right? That way, judges never stand in that fold to be part of the solution, because by practice doing that, you've abdicated your authority to parole, because you don't see the case again until it's time to punish them. And even if you have no familiarity with that person, you won't even really know if punishment is appropriate as being alleged by probation, right? You're actually giving them the authority. And so many times have you heard somebody that's on probation say, well, I better do this or that or my PO is going to lock me up. POs don't have the authority to lock you up. They have the authority to detain you to get you back in front of the judge. The judge is the one that's supposed to have the authority as to when you get locked up or not. But by practice, that's not how it's, done, right? It's not done in that fashion. And so that was why I said, okay, we need to stop. We need to put that genie back in the bottle and put probation back in the place they were intended to be. And that is to help the judge supervise this probation or a sentence in the way that the judge had envisioned as the steward of that supervision. And so that is what resource-based sentencing and supervision allows to happen. It puts that genie back in the bottle. It allows the judges, and I think I failed to really explain what resource-based sentencing and supervision is. So resource-based sentencing and supervision at its core, it is a system of accountability whereby the sentencing and supervising judge is held accountable to articulate a comprehensive sentence that addresses the root causes of the actual offense. So if I'm sentencing somebody with 2 possessions with intent to deliver and a 10th grade education, I could set my watch to his 3rd one. So it's time for us to stop acting like we don't know that. You got to make them get that high school diploma. You got to figure out, okay, how are you going to support you and your 3 kids? How are you going to move forward without doing something illegal? And so resource-based sentencing and supervision requires the judge to articulate a comprehensive sentence. And for every condition in that comprehensive sentence, right there at the bar of the court during sentencing, provide a cost-free resource, nonprofit organization or a governmental entity, social services entity funded by the governmental entity, right? And a cost-free resource is provided for them to actually meet that condition. And critically, thereafter, you must have various status listings to chart their progress. You cannot give people a bunch of resources and tell them to go do better. Because if they could do that in the first place, they wouldn't be in front of you.
Well, they say,
right?
If you know better, you'll do better.
100%.
But if they don't know better, you won't do better. Listen.
At the comprehensive status listings that come subsequently, that is where the nonprofit organization or the governmental entity that is the social service support service that you're giving, they are held accountable to the judge to prove that they're doing what they were supposed to do. The defendant is held accountable to make sure that they're trying as hard as they can. The lawyer is held accountable. Hey, did you call your client? Did you make sure your client was going? Probation is held accountable to follow that order. So it's a system of accountability. And those nonprofit organizations that don't deliver the service that they say they do, and they're not culturally sensitive enough to be able to deliver those services, stop using them. They get kicked out the network and you no longer send any more referrals to them. The only ones that maintain referrals through resource-based sentencing and supervision are the ones that are respectful, responsive, and deliver the service they say they're going to deliver. And so that's what resource-based sentencing and supervision is. It is a system of accountability whereby recidivism is reduced because you're removing the desperation and you're creating productive citizens to increase that tax base for the system, and will also decrease the violence in the street and therefore increase public safety. It's a win-win-win all the way around.
Well, you certainly made your point. It is well taken. I hope that the listening audience and the viewing audience get a chance to do and act upon some of what's being said here. Big thanks to Judge Stephanie Sawyer for joining us today and sharing her insights on how we can rethink justice. Her work with the Sentencing Foundation reminds us that it's not just about locking people up. It's about creating pathways to bring people back into the fold of society. If you're inspired by what you've heard, find out how you can support her work, whether it's through donations, volunteering, or just spreading the message. We all have a role to play in changing the system. Don't forget, you can catch this in every episode of The Urban Perspectives, wherever you're listening to a podcast. Subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear these stories, and let these conversations keep going on. Remember, change starts with us. One voice, one action, one step at a time. Thank you.
'Cause I can't let them take my soul. Nah,